Hey, good morning, everyone. I am Johnny Diaz. I'm here to share with you guys God's Word. I am super honored that you have taken the time to watch this, to listen in, and also be part of the family. Some of you might just be joining us online. Some of you, maybe it's in person, but you wanted to listen to the message again, whatever the case is. Either way, I want to say thank you. So today we are having a conversation about kind of the ebbs and flows of life. I know that once upon a time I was reading a book by a Christian author, a pastor, in fact, and his name escapes me right now, but he was kind of sharing with his congregation and even others who were trying to ask the question of, like, why is it that I feel like sometimes I have really good days, sometimes I have really bad days? And honestly, our memory has a tendency of remembering the bad days more than the good sometimes. So it's one of those, like, hey, so they're kind of coming to the pastor going like, can you guide us? Can you help us? Can you help me with this struggle that I'm having? And I love it because as he described it, he said, listen, I know that sometimes we think of life as good days like up on a mountain and then bad days down in a valley. And he said that's not really an adequate understanding of life. In fact, a better understanding would be, I want you to imagine two rails on a railroad. The train travels on these, and that's how it gets from point A to point B, but they parallel one another. Both realities are in existence at the same time. And it helped that person understand it's not an issue of life is great and life stinks sometimes. No, life is great and it stinks at the same time. There are moments that do get us down, and there are other moments that we feel like we are on top of the world, to quote Imagine Dragons. I don't know whether you guys listen to them or not, but they have a song that says, I'm on top of the world. And even though we feel like it's a roller coaster, it's not. Jesus described it in Matthew as he was kind of giving his parables. He said, "Listen, there are those. Once upon a time, his little story that he gave, a parable of a man who was, in charge of farming, and so he went out as the farmer and he planted seed, and it grew up to be wheat. However, in the middle of the night, after he had just put the seed down, the enemy came in and planted weeds." So when the farm hands started to notice that these two different plants were growing up, they look the same, by the way, when they grow together. But as they start to develop, they are very, very different. So they said to the farmer, can we pull out the bad weeds and let the wheat grow on its own? And he said, no, don't do that because you're going to damage both plants. Let them grow together. But in the end, I promise you that we will, when the harvest time comes, we will grab all the weeds and bundle them together and throw them in the fire. And the wheat we will gather and put in our barn. So it is in the kingdom. And what God was trying to express to us, Jesus trying to express to us, is that evil and his kingdom will grow up and develop together. He's not here to just come in and regulate and get rid of the bad. Rather, he's saying, listen, the bad and the good are going to grow together. But just know that in the end, the good wins. Why do I bring that up? Because I don't know where you are in your walk with Jesus. I don't know. We hope that our walk with Jesus is always stable, it's always good, it's always consistent, it's always resilient. However, as a pastor, I have walked alongside many of people that it's not always that case. There are moments when you're like, man, I remember when God would speak to me this way, or I remember going to camp once, or maybe I remember a time when God did X, Y, Z, and it feels like He's not doing that anymore. Or maybe I'm in a depression, or maybe I lost somebody that was close to me, or I lost my job, or I lost my career, or I've lost my identity. There's so many things that can go, and literally we feel like we're in a valley, we're in the slope, we're stuck, we're in a spiral going downward, whatever the case is. And I want to pause and say, listen, the parable that Jesus told us tells us, hey, yeah, like this pastor said, they're two parallels that run alongside each other. They're simultaneous at the same time. But I want to share with you a story of something that Jesus did. And the main focus always in the Gospels is, what did Jesus do, right? Let's focus on Jesus, not the periphery, not the around stuff. Look at to Jesus, and hopefully it'll help you if you're stuck in a slump right now, if you're stuck in a place of darkness or maybe doubt or maybe fear, so many things, anxiety. Let me share this with you. So if you want, grab your Bible and you want to turn to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew is the first of the four Gospels, and it's basically the story of Jesus, right? The biography of Jesus, if you will. And Matthew tells us in chapter 17 this very story, starting with verse 1. If you want to read with me, that'd be awesome. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. He was transfigured in front of them, and his face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. I will set up 3 shelters here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down and were terrified. Jesus came up, touched them, and said, "Get up, don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." So the disciples asked him, "So why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" "Elijah is coming and will restore everything," he replied. "But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him. On the contrary, what they they did whatever they pleased to him. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. This story is a transfiguration story. Transfiguration, where does this come from? We look at a Greek word called metamorpho. It means, well, probably what it sounds like in English, metamorphosis. Yes, it is a transformation. We use the word transfiguration, but in modern English, transformed is probably more the word that we're looking for. What's beautiful is, what is Jesus doing? I want you to pay very close attention. First off, there are many disciples that Jesus has. One group that's not really a disciple, they're more there just to watch things. That's the crowd. That's the big circle, right? In the smaller circle, then you have those who he calls disciples, but it's not just the 12, it is those who are actually pursuing. Then he has the 12. So the circle now has 3 rings. The smaller ring so far is the 12. He has his 12 disciples. But of those 12, he pulls away 3. Why 3? These 3 are the ones that you will see Jesus pull aside and give them a little bit more than the other 12. The intimacy level seems to grow more. And who are these 3? There's Peter, who is possibly the oldest, also the loudmouth disciple. There's John, which is the youngest. He's the one that's always following after Jesus intimately and quietly. And then there's James, which is John's brother, right? So these 3 somehow, Jesus does something beautiful. He invites them into something greater. He invites them to see his glory. You see, in the Transfiguration, Jesus is up on a mountain. Now, there's a whole lot of Old Testament allusions that I need to bring to your attention. First off, in the Old Testament, every time that God showed up to Israel or to his prophets, it was normally on a mountain, and the mountain was covered in smoke or fire. He would lead the Israelites through the wilderness by what? It was a cloud during the day, a fire during the night that would come down from heaven. When the tabernacle was built, after God instructed Moses to build the tabernacle, his dwelling place among his people, he said, "Listen, you'll know that I'm in the tabernacle because the pillar of smoke will be resting on the tabernacle, or a pillar of fire." Now that we understand that the mountain and the cloud and the fire and all the significance, now we continue on with our story. Where is Jesus? He's walking up the mountain. See the similarity? As he's walking up the mountain, he brings these 3. Can we pause and understand this? God is always interested in showing you more. He always wants to reveal not only more of himself, but he also wants to reveal himself to you so that you can understand who you are too. So he invites these three, Peter, James, John. As they come closer in that moment with no warning, he is transformed into the actual, like his actual state, which is the glorified Jesus, right? Does he dumb it down when he's on earth? Yes, he does. And we'll get to that in a second. He, all of a sudden, his clothes are as pure white as you will ever see white, okay? His face is shining like the sun. And if you're wondering, where did this depiction come from? Revelation confirms that this is what Jesus looks like in his glorified state. So he is bright and shining. He is glowing like a sun that has now been placed on the earth, like you can barely see it. And in the midst of him being glorified, now there are two present guests, one Moses and one Elijah. As he looks at Moses and Elijah, there's some sort of conversation, and we have to leave it there. I know that many times, many pastors try to tell you what the conversation was. I'm sorry. The Gospels do not talk about that conversation. We cannot assume that we know anything about that conversation. But I want to highlight why these two men. One is Moses. Moses represented the law. He represented the greatest leader that Israel ever had. However, Moses even said, someday someone like me, but exponentially greater than me, will come and lead you, Israel. So they always look to the example of Moses, knowing that there will be a Moses-like person representing the law. Over to the other side of Jesus, we have Elijah. Why Elijah? There were tons of other prophets. Well, can I highlight this? Moses, that we know of, never died. He walked around the mountain, and then no one ever heard from him again. So for all we know, he never tasted death, and he just went with God. Similar to Enoch, right? However, Elijah also did not die. He ends up having a chariot of fire that comes over, picks him up, and takes him to heaven. No death involved. He's gone. Wow. However, if we look at Elijah, why is it that Elijah is the one represented here? Because, one, he represents all of the prophets during that time. Also, he's the one with the most amount of miracles. So if you look at all the prophets, they spoke often, miracles sometimes. Elijah's the one with the most. So here you have Moses representing the law. Here you have Elijah representing the prophets and miracles. And who is standing in the midst of them? The one and only that represents both, fulfilling all. What conversation they're having, I don't know. But just like anything, we are having this beautiful, glorious moment. Why? Because Jesus has invited us to be part of an experience. By the way, he always initiates it. I know as Christians, we oftentimes go to camps, go to retreats, go to events because we say we want to have these mountaintop experiences, and it's okay to pursue that. But I want to let you know, if they don't happen, it's okay. It is his choice when we get invited into these intimate and beautiful, glorious, glory-filled moments. So, what happens? Peter starts to talk. And you guys probably know Peter enough. He's not the best guy to be talking. Why? Because he will always get himself in trouble. In this case, he looks over at Jesus and says, "Oh my goodness, Lord, it's good that we're here." Why does he say it's good that we're here? Because he's referring to two different realities. One, we get to tell people what we experience. That's a good thing, right? We get to share this with all the other disciples and the people. Secondly, we're here as workmen. How many are there? There's three of them. Peter, James, John. And how many are they looking at? Jesus, Moses, Elijah. Numbers matter, okay? Here's what Peter's thinking. I will build a tent and I'll put it over Jesus. You will build a tent over Moses and you build a tent over Elijah. And what is Peter trying to do? You see, back in the Old Testament, the tent, the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, this is where God would meet Moses. This is where God would meet Israel. Remember the smoke and pillar or the fire pillar? God would show up. So here's Peter. I get it. He's having an Old Testament moment, but he shouldn't have said anything. It's called enjoy the moment. When God shows up, here's what we as human beings have the tendency of doing. Let me capitalize on this. Ooh, did I just say that? Yes, I did. Let me bottle this. Let me capture this. Let me see how this happens so that I could repeat it somewhere else. Peter's interested in putting a tabernacle. Why? Because he doesn't want this moment to end. He wants it to continue on. And then God does something Very, very important. A cloud of light begins to envelop all three, not both. We have Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. All of them are now engulfed in this. Now the disciples can't see Jesus. What does this mean? The cloud coming in means God is present. Remember the Old Testament reference. It also means that God is now in control of the situation. He envelops Jesus and the rest of them. This is God in his glory and his power. And from the cloud declares with his voice an echo of Jesus' baptism. This is my son, whom I love, and I am well pleased. Jesus needed to hear that when he entered into the wilderness. Because God reveals himself so that you can know him greater and you can know yourself even more. You see, mountaintop experiences, as we call them, or this transfiguration, or this declaration that God is shouting to Peter now, this is for our benefit, but also for his glory. And before it's for our benefit, it's more for his glory. The voice declares to him, this is my son whom I love, and I am well pleased. And then the best directive ever, excuse me, Peter, listen to him. That's God's not so gentle way of saying, Peter, why are you talking? You're ruining the moment. This moment should have been focused strictly and always on my son. Your job is to listen, not to talk. I think a lot of us could learn a lot from that moment. To which all three men fall down, face down, which is an act of worship, but in fear. They hear the voice, they're scared, they worship because they know who it is. And then when they look up, Jesus' hand is on them, saying, get up, don't be afraid. Anytime you have a heavenly person, meaning an angel, Jesus, God, whoever, showing up from heaven, whenever they show up, we're always scared as human beings. And there's always that affirmative, don't be afraid. This is what we call a theophany, or in this case, a Christophany, a revelation of who Christ is and or God. Jesus reminds them, don't be afraid. And they look up, and what do they see? Listen to what I'm about to say. They see plain old Jesus. He's not glowing. His face is not like the sun. Elijah and Moses are gone. And what does Jesus say? Hey, when we get to the other nine, don't tell anybody what you just saw until the Son of Man is brought back from the dead. They then begin to ask questions about Elijah. Why? Because they saw Elijah. So then they're looking at going, well, hold on one second. Well, why did the scribes and they say that Elijah's supposed to come? To which Jesus just confirms, listen, Elijah did come. That was John the Baptist. But they killed him. And they're going to do the same to me. But let's pause for a second and back up before this whole theological conversation. Why did Jesus tell them not to say anything? It's called the Messianic secret. It's not just found in Matthew, it's also found in Mark. It was Jesus' way of telling his disciples, listen, you can't tell anyone what you just experienced because you will paint a picture of me that is inaccurate. It's not enough. The picture has to include the cross. The picture has to include my mission. The picture has to include my resurrection. Otherwise, this moment and this event won't make sense. You'll make me a superhero that I'm not. You'll make my mission something that it's not. Can I ask you this question? Have we as a church not created Jesus' mission into something that it's not? What do I mean by that? We believe that we're supposed to go to church and we're supposed to have these aha mountaintop experiences. We believe that if a church is a good church, then it should be offering these aha mountaintop experiences. We believe that even when you sit down and read your Bible in the morning, that you should have this profound, like angelic beings showing up, and or we think, and then what happens? We start to do. It's kind of like a drug. We start to chase the next. You hear the language of we want revival. We want revival. No, you don't. And I'll prove how you don't. The reason why you don't want revival is because you don't want Jesus. as godly and as incredible as things are that we declare that we want to see, let's be real. You're not going to get them because you don't even want Jesus. The goal is always Jesus. To want God, to want more intimacy with Him, to experience time with Him. That's the goal. The other stuff is additive, sure, but not the goal. Did I mention to you how Jesus was just plain old Jesus? You see, these glorious moments that will happen in your life where God shows up or God does something that blows you away, the reason why He does that is not so that this is the standard of what you should be expecting from God all the time. No, these are the exceptions. God shows up, blows your mind, blows whatever imagination you had of Him out of the water, and you have this mountaintop experience. This mountaintop experience is meant to feed your ordinary everyday life. Otherwise, we get disappointed with the ordinary everyday life, the disappointments in life, the darkness in life, the sadness in life, the God let me down, we conclude, because He didn't do what I thought He should have, or how He should have, or why He should have. And then it's the only way that I can have faith in God again is I got to go find Him somewhere and have this mountaintop experience. And honestly, it does not sound good. It really does sound like a drug when you describe it that way. No, those moments that we had with God back in the day, those moments were supposed to give us the strength, the resilience, the commitment to follow Him in the ordinary everyday life. You know that we're supposed to follow Jesus in depression, even? We're supposed to follow Jesus in brokenness. We're supposed to follow Jesus when we lose someone that's close to us. We're supposed to still follow Jesus when we lose our identity, or we lose our way, or we lose our job, or we lose our directive. All those things will be shifted and moved around. And I'm not downplaying if you're dealing with depression, or no, no, no. What I'm saying is, even in your depression, don't run from Him, run to Him. He hasn't left you. In the darkest of valleys, now it makes sense why David writes in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the shadow of death, I don't fear evil because you're with me. Man, Jesus, thank you for the huge, incredible experience that I had. And I want to carry that with me, because there are going to be dark moments in my life where I'm going to need a light to shine. And I'm going to remember what you've done. That's why the Old Testament exists. Read it through and through, and you will find out what do they do. It's Israel saying, remember when God. Remember when God. That's why we can now. Don't waste the mountaintop experiences, and do not waste even the valleys that we walk through. Grace and peace be with you. This is the way. God bless you guys. We'll see you next Sunday.